I saw that you were on Ravina's class, the one about spicy sauces. You seem to have a lot of questions about that. Were you going to make some of those recipes?
Well, I would love to eat those if someone can just cook me,
Make
but
them
I'm not. But I'm not gonna do the hard work of cooking that. I'll just run downstairs and grab something to eat.
understand. Maybe you can get Ravina to send you some because she's probably making it a lot at this point. So we're here on live stream, and I guess we can start the recording again. Do you do that normally, Michael?
Yeah, I can do that. You can do that too, but
Yeah, I just didn't know whether you're going
no
to do
worries.
that.
Yeah, I will do that at 30. When it hits the clock.
All right. I'm going to mute you though, because get a little background noise there. Hi, Teresa. Welcome.
Hello.
Hello, Rita. Oh, I see Rita's connecting to audio. Hi, is this Wilsey? Am I saying that correctly,
That
Wilsey?
is correct, yes.
All right. That's a whimsical, really nice name. I like it, Wilsey.
Like we will see. We'll see.
Oh, we'll see. Okay. We'll see. Got it. We'll see. Is this your first class with me?
Yes.
I thought
Yes.
so. I think I would remember your name.
Yes.
And I know Rita's been with me before. Welcome back, Rita. Teresa, your name's familiar. Have you been in one of my classes before?
I don't think
Thank
so.
you.
Okay. Sure, you're welcome. It's hard to remember everybody's name, but I try to recognize, and I do a little bit better recognizing faces, but when you come back a lot, I start to remember. You've been to other Get Set Up classes?
Yes, I have. We'll
Yes.
see. I have.
Okay. Rita, I know you have, and Teresa, you have as well.
Yes.
Yes, I have.
What other classes have you taken that you've really enjoyed?
I really enjoyed, let's see, which one was my favorite? 7 Healthy Foods. She talked about cinnamon and ginger and things like that. I enjoyed that because she elaborated on it.
Okay.
And then, yeah, there was another one about like starting your own business. That was an interesting one.
Good.
There's been a lot, and I've actually enjoyed 95% of them.
That's really good feedback. Nice to hear that. Thanks.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're really experiencing a broad variety of types of classes, which is really, really nice. We've got so many things going on. In fact, I was looking through the classes that are coming up today and tomorrow, and I just thought I'd kind of pass along to you while we're waiting for some folks to join us that, we have one that's coming up tomorrow called Conquering Negative Thinking. And that's my friend Bernadette. She does an exceptional job. Everyone who takes that class loves it. It's at 11:30 Pacific time and 2:30 Eastern time, if I have my times.
Oh,
And
that sounds really good.
yeah, I think it's been really popular. And then there's one
Especially with what's going on right now.
about it. Exactly. That's exactly why I wanted to mention it. Then we have some fun things too. An introduction to calligraphy is happening. That's happening tomorrow at 8:30 Pacific time or 11:30 Eastern time. And then tonight we have one on the famous art of the Vatican. So that's at 5 o'clock Pacific and 8 o'clock Eastern. Relaxing,
Yeah,
Donna,
that sounds good.
Donna does a great job with those art classes. So she gives us a nice tour right from our armchair. See people floating in yet? That's good.
Yeah, I think I've taken a couple of her classes. I enjoyed them.
Yeah, she's good. She's fun. Hey, Marcia.
Yeah.
Okay.
I want to take the gardening one.
The gardening one? Oh, yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
That reminds me, I need to get out there in my garden sometime this week. Getting out of control and my vegetables need to be planted. So I'm going to share my screen right now so we can go ahead and get started. I think most people have started to have pretty much wandered in here. And you should be able to see my screen at this point. It says Soups from Scratch. Do you see that? You see
Yes.
that? Okay, just want to make sure that's all working properly. I'd like to formally welcome you. My name is Deb Livingston. For those of you who haven't been to any of my classes before, I live in York, Pennsylvania, so I'm teaching to you from the East Coast. And my background is in psychology and adult and organizational development, which means that in my career, I spent a lot of time teaching adults and coaching and managing. And now I'm having this great time being able to take those skills and channel them into teaching fun things like food to people who want to learn more about it and actually want to come to class. So I enjoy this and I enjoy learning with all of you. And I think that we do learn best together when we can share information. And also the best form of participation, I think, is when you're on camera and when you use your microphone to sit in and add your thoughts. I always ask questions along the way. So I do invite you to turn on your camera. I know sometimes we're just not in a camera ready mode, so I totally appreciate that. But I also want to encourage you. And if you're a little bit camera shy, I hope that you'll get past that at some point and join our community because it's a lot of fun. And it also energizes the guides as well when we can see your faces. So I'm looking at Will C right now. Thank you so much for being on camera. And there comes Marcia. Thank you so much. So we are recording this class and I'm going to introduce you to Michael up there in the corner. And he's our technical support. So he's turned on the recording for us. He's here to help with technical questions and to monitor the chat as we go along. So that's, he's also going to make sure that microphones are muted. If for some reason you take yourself off mute to talk, just make sure you're back on. But if he sees that you're not on mute, he might mute you just to keep the background noise out. So if you're joining by live stream, so having said that, we've got one of those. I'm going to mute that. Okay. So Michael, if you can catch those issues when they need muted. You can request a recording after the class at the email help@getsetup.io, which is where you also go if you need any help with connection with us, or if you're having any problems with the site in any way. We are on live stream today. Have any of you used live stream yet or checked it out in the background on the website? So you
No.
can see that on the left-hand side of the website. And you know what we thought was it would make a very cool background noise, a kind of thing, like when you are at home and you're doing the dishes and you have the Today Show running in the background.
Oh.
We thought we might be able to be a version of the Today Show running in your background at some point. So those of you who are joining us by live stream, we really welcome you. And we also think that the best way to participate is to register and join a class and join this lovely group of people sitting in front of me right now. Get Setup's not paid to promote any specific products or services. I share a lot of those things in my classes, but there's no financial connection there whatsoever. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to really get into the nuts and bolts of laying a good foundation for homemade soups. And I have several classes on soups that are emerging right now. I have a follow-on class on bean soups and chowders. I have one on creamed soups that is coming up, and one on chilled soups. But this one really lays the groundwork. So we're going to talk about some benefits of soup, some soup terms, how to make broth and stock, because that is really where you gain control of the flavor of your soup. And then some basic soup making steps that when you recognize them, you'll be able to see them in recipes. They vary a little bit, but they give you a good guideline so that when you want to wing it and make your own soup, you know what steps to use. And then I have a few recipes to try. We'll see how far we get. Lots of times we have a lot of questions about the stocks and the broths. So when we get to the recipes, we might have to do just a quick overview, but rest assured, what I'm going to do after the class is send you an email that has all the links to all the recipes. And so you'll be able to recreate those. And I've selected ones that use these soup making steps. So it should illustrate to you those soups being made in action using those steps. So I'm kind of curious, and since we have a relatively small group, I just invite you to unmute yourself. What made you show up today? What was the one thing that you thought you might like to learn in this class? Or what just interested you? Yes, Marcia.
Well, I got stuck, although it was nice, on a frozen lake in New Hampshire for the last year because of COVID. We went up for the summer and stayed, and I wound up making what I think is this old-fashioned stock pot, in that I just kept it going. And I had the temperatures were below freezing, so I could just take the pot and put it out on my deck. And then when it got down a little bit, I'd add a new ingredient and a new stock, and it kept us going all winter. It was terrific, but I really just did it intuitively. So I thought it'd be fun to join. So I'm really into soups is the point.
Yeah, I guess you learned a lot about soups. That is amazing. And I love that you did that because, boy, doesn't that really speak to our ability to be resilient and creative and to use what we have on hand. And I think that's really what it's all about, especially in this time as we are starting to see inflation happening. The price of food is going up. We can't waste things, and we need to eat nourishing foods. And boy, that's a great story. I love that, Marcia. Thanks. Anyone else?
Well, I'd like to learn about how to make soups flavorful. I've been known around my friends as a slice and dice queen because I like to make my own soup. I like to cut up the vegetables. They say, well, why don't you put it in the chopper? No, I love it when I can use that knife and cut my ingredients up. But I really suck at flavoring. And I don't want to use salt, but I want to enhance the flavor and, make my broth much flavorful.
Okay, sounds really good. We can do that. We'll talk about that today, exactly. And do you have a favorite knife since you're such the slice and dice queen?
You know, until last year, that was the very first time I ever purchased a chef knife. So all I use is like a maybe I think they call it like a paring knife, or I don't have a special knife. Just my little hands and whatever I can run across.
Okay. Well, I bought a chef's knife. Well, it's been several years now, but that was really a boon for me to be able to become a slice and dice queen here on the
Right.
East Coast too. But yeah, they're great. Yeah, I see you nodding your head, Marcia. Hey, Cheryl Ann, I see that you're here and you're here twice. Wow.
Oh no.
I just muted you just because, go ahead and turn the volume off of one of your devices so that you can speak.
So sorry.
No worries at all. I'm glad to have you back. I recognize you. That picture always lets me know it's you. I love it. Okay, so let's move on to some of the benefits of soup. And these may be things like, as if you needed to be encouraged to eat soup. These are just a few more things that you might find as interesting, fun facts. Soup is really healthy for us. And soup eaters, when we eat at least soup once a week, have a higher diet quality score overall, meaning we just eat better when we eat soup. Without soup in our diet, we're 40% more likely to be overweight. Isn't that interesting? Now, I'm sure that doesn't include some of the creamed soups that I get into. I have a couple decadent recipes in some of my other classes, but for the most part, the brothy soups that we're talking about, you're going to improve your diet. Soup does lower the risk of developing type 2 diabetes. And this is actually research-based. And the reason this is the case is because soup, generally speaking, is loaded with a lot of vegetables, and that means a lot of fiber, and also high vitamins, high mineral content. So overall, healthy and has a way of balancing out our system and keeping out, well, the fiber slows the digestion, and that stops sugar spikes when we have slower digestion. Now, interestingly, lots of folks come and say, well, I don't want to use a lot of salt in my soup. And I can appreciate that. And of course, when we're buying soup in the cans, we have to buy that low sodium stuff because it's really high anyway. But what's kind of neat about soup is that because of the ingredients in it, the other vegetables and the meats and things that we put into it, there's also a lot of potassium in soup. So it just kind of works out on average that the potassium offsets the sodium a bit. Not to say you shouldn't be cautious with how much sodium you use, but it's not necessary to go completely salt-free either, unless you are really trying to manage that and you really have to cut back. But what happens is that potassium can transport sodium out of the body. That's why that balance is so important and helpful. If you've ever been to the doctor for high blood pressure or heard of someone who has been, oftentimes before they're prescribed a particular kind of medication, they'll be prescribed a potassium pill to alleviate the water and see if that'll take care of it. So that's what happens here. Eating soup also increases our water intake without really thinking about it. And I see Marcia's up there drinking her water. We should all bring our water. Because as we get older, we don't know we're thirsty and we get dehydrated. So water helps us and soup helps us stay hydrated. And lastly, you may have already heard this, but chicken soup is actually research-based. Results say that it does help cold symptoms. It helps to reduce inflammation. So that grandmother's tale about chicken soup being good when you're sick, it's absolutely correct. So that's pretty cool. Do you have any other benefits that you would add to this list? Besides, it just tastes good.
Right, I was gonna say it's yummy.
And that you can keep a pot of it outside in the winter all.
Yes. Well, it seems to warm me up and keep me warmer than other things. You know what I mean? Inside, just when I get so cold.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's really a craving in the wintertime, isn't it? There's just
Yeah.
nothing about that, nothing better than that. And even to sit, I find myself sitting in front of the television with a bowl of it in my hand, just warming my hands too. Not that I should be sitting in front of the TV.
And sometimes if I have this pot going, in the middle of the night, if I get hungry, and rather than eating something that's really not great, I'll have a little, like a teacup of soup. And it's very satisfying, and I go right back to sleep.
That's a great idea. And you know, these stocks that we're going to talk about today, same thing is true, broth and stock. If you're making that on a regular basis, what I'm trying to do as a habit is work that into my warm afternoon drink instead of having another cup of coffee or whatever it is, because what you're getting is all those vitamins and minerals in there. So it's a very nutritious kind of snack that's very low calorie. So here are a few soup terms that we want to know as a baseline. And I'm going to ask you for your input in identifying these if you can. So right here, we've got 3 ingredients: carrots, onions, and celery. Can anyone name what it is that we call that group of ingredients when we are making soup?
Starts with the M.
Yeah, mirepoix.
Okay.
Mirepoix. It is mirepoix. That's exactly right. And it is also called sofrito in Italian. Sometimes these ingredients change up a little bit. The Italians might tend to use more leeks. In Germany, it's called Suppengrün, and they will go to the store and buy a little bundle of soup-making vegetables, and this is their mirepoix. And then in the South, in the Creole country, the basis for jambalaya and gumbo and all those Southern dishes, Creole dishes, it's called the Holy Trinity. And then in that case, we've got green peppers instead here. I believe that's the case. Anybody know anything about Creole cooking here? Okay, maybe we'll have to add another class just on Creole cooking at some point.
Right.
So this little bundle of joy here, what do we call this? These are all different herbs. We've got some thyme and rosemary and bay, little parsley, I think, is here. You know what this is called in the culinary world? It's called
A bouquet.
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 Bouquet garni. And it is just that, and it can vary. And if you're talking about, we'll see, making a more flavorful stock or broth, this is going to be part of it. This is going to be part of it. And the other thing that's going to be part of it is this group or category of items. And this is a little more obscure, but these add flavor and fragrance, and you might have seen the term as a group term. Can you think of what that might be? I know this is a little tougher. Just in general, these are called the aromatics.
Oh, okay.
So they get added in the beginning along with these after they get started. And they start to really, when you put them into the bottom of your soup pot before the broth, before the stock, you get that flavor, you get that fragrance coming up. You know it's going to really impart great flavor into your stock.
So is that it looks like it's a garlic, ginger.
Yep, thanks for asking. And it can vary. It can really vary. These are just examples. So these are some onions or even some shallots, perhaps, garlic cloves, ginger. There's black peppercorns here. We've got a few herbs. Lots of times we will use dry herbs here, but they probably did this as photo op.
And
here.
what was in the bouquet?
The bouquet can vary, but this bouquet has a bay leaf. That's pretty typical for in a soup stock or broth. And then this is thyme. There's many varieties of thyme. There's a lemon thyme, so you can impart different flavors with your thyme. There's parsley in here. Now, parsley is something that does a double duty. You can use it throughout the cooking, and you can also add it in at the end because it tends to really mellow out. And if you want that fresh forward flavor of parsley, you want to also add it at the end. And then rosemary is another very nice pungent herb that makes a beautiful taste in food.
So I grew rosemary all winter.
Wow, good for you. You were able to keep it alive, or did you have it in the house?
I had it in the house.
Good. So you got to use that. That's
Yeah.
lovely. Okay, and what do we have up here? Anybody have one of these gadgets?
Yes. Blender. Hand blender.
Yep, an immersion blender, because so named because we put the blade completely underneath the soup. Because if we do not, we splatter it all over the place, a word to the wise. So you put it down into the soup and it blends the soup for you instead of putting it into a large blender. Sometimes if I'm creaming my whole pot of soup, I'll still put it in the blender. It just seems easier, but I do like this. Sometimes soups call for just blending part of the soup. Sometimes in bean soups, you want it to get a little creamier. So you stick your immersion blender in there and whiz it around a bit. And it does blend some of it and leaves the rest chunky. So you can have a combination of things. It's very nice. And as a side benefit, it makes a good frother for milk if you want to do a latte hack, which is what I do. All right, some other soup terms here, because I think this is very confusing. And I'm just going to throw this out to you. What's the difference between broth and stock? Do you know?
Ooh, is broth one ingredient? No, it isn't. One key ingredient. I don't know.
Any other guesses? You know, the grocery store makes it even more difficult because they use things interchangeably. But I'll tell you, I did some research on this to really satisfy myself that I knew what I was talking about. Broth it literally means to boil. It is intended as an ingredient to drink on its own. Okay, it's a really nice light kind of broth, like type of beverage or liquid. And it can be made with meat or vegetables or both. And when we are making it only with vegetables, it is both a broth and a stock. And I'll tell you why. It's because a stock, by definition, uses bones. Of course, no vegetables that I'm aware of have bones. So we use a stock and we make it with bones, and a stock is typically used to create something else, like a sauce or a soup. And so when we are making a soup that is vegetarian, made out of vegetable broth, we call it a vegetable stock. So that's just the interchangeability of that term when it relates to vegetable only. And so stock can be bones and meat. It can be bones and meat and vegetables. It can be just bones. And it depends upon what it is that you're making it for, how you're using it. I know that I have a hard time throwing any bones away that I ever have without cooking them off. You do too, Marcia, especially after this past winter, right?
Whenever I would get a roasted chicken, we'll use the meat, and then I'll take the bones and make it the base of the next stock pot.
Beautiful. That's exactly it. That's the nature of it. And then you do have that continually going. And if you're not really lucky enough to be frozen on a lake somewhere to have your stock pot out all winter long, you can just keep freezing it. Keep it in the freezer. Or in the refrigerator, it stays. I'll give you some tips. And then lastly, this bone broth idea. How many of you have seen that as the rage right now? Bone broth out in the store that's just selling for a really pricey amount. And why is bone broth such a big deal right now? Does anybody know? Why are they selling and advertising bone broth like crazy?
Because of the protein content.
Somewhat the protein and especially the collagen and the glucosamine, the minerals that are in there, because what we feel is that if we're taking more collagen into our bodies, we're going to build more collagen in our bodies. Now, you can't, I hate to disappoint, but you can't drink a cup of bone broth and intake the collagen and have that collagen march down to your knees. You know, it just doesn't work that way. Would that it would. I wish it would. But what it does do is it breaks down into amino acids, and they're the building blocks of collagen. And so we hope that as we're taking in more amino acids, we are generating some more collagen. And bone broth uses many different kinds of, but this kind of bone broth makes uses many different kinds of bones, because there are different characteristics of different bones that add value. So I know that Marcia makes her own broth, her own perpetual broth. Does anybody else have any experience with making their own broth or stock? Okay, good. You're in for a treat then. Let's start with the vegetable stock broth. If you're someone who, like me, likes to take advantage of, I don't like to throw things away. I like to take advantage of what I have on hand, like we talked about the bones. Same thing with vegetable scraps. So you can make a very inexpensive and very tasty vegetable broth using kitchen scraps. When I go to the store and I see what they're charging for those little pet boxes or the cans of vegetable broth at the store, I just want to, oh, wow, I can save so much money and it tastes so much better. So here's what your strategy is. When you are working on meal planning through the week or preparing your salads or cutting up your vegetables, keep your peelings. Make sure you're washing your veggies really well. Keep your peelings, keep your ends, keep your onion shells, all the things that you might normally throw away. Yes, even shells, including garlic peels and ends of things, the things that have roots on the ends, all of that, fine, just as long as it's clean. Put them in a container. A plastic bag will be fine, a freezer bag, and put them in the refrigerator or freezer, excuse me, and keep it there until you have a goodly amount, and then you will be ready to make vegetable broth. The guideline is, this is simple to do in a crock pot. I throw it in my scraps in the crock pot, half solids to half water. And you can do it for an hour on the stove. It doesn't take that long. 3 to 4 is better, or you can just infuse your whole house with this wonderful smell, fragrance all day long by putting it in that crock pot. And then at the end of the time, you want to strain it and make sure you get all the little pieces and shells and things out of that. So let's take a look at the recipe here, because this recipe does call for adding just a little bit extra, vegetable. Let me see if I can up this a little bit. And it just depends on how many scraps and how bulky they are, how much you might have thrown an onion in your bag that was just one you didn't want to slice up. It was a little old or something. Maybe that's plenty of onion, but otherwise you might take one yellow onion, quarter it up. You don't even have to take the skin off, just quarter it up. 2 cloves of garlic. Again, you don't even have to peel them. You can just throw them in the way they are. 3 chopped carrots, 3 stalks of celery chopped. I wouldn't put too many leaves of the celery in because it tends to get a little bit bitter sometimes. And then 3 cups of these veggie scraps or whatever you have. Believe me, measuring here is not really the most important thing. You can just eyeball it. That's the beauty of it too. And then some, this says 8 sprigs of thyme, 8 sprigs of parsley. I just kind of eyeball that too and throw it in, some peppercorns, and then fill the whole thing up with water. And you can then consider these things as ideal for scraps, the things we talked about, leek ends. I want to show you this. I like to show, does anybody cook with leeks? Yeah, Marcia, you do? Okay. So leeks, if you are not familiar with them, are those like scallions on steroids in the grocery store. They're huge. And the only part that you really use for your meals is this white part. It's the tender part. Leeks are kind of dirty, so you do have to slit them down and get the sand out. They're easy to wash out though. And what you do with all of this, which has always felt like such a waste to me because I threw them away, is put them in your bag. And when it comes time to make your veggie broth, you can use these. Now, I sometimes, because there's so many, if I put 3 in there, I probably don't put all of them in, but maybe half to add to the rest of my scraps.
And then you strain them out because they're tough to eat.
You strain everything out because all you're really doing with the vegetable stock is throwing those vegetables in and getting the flavor from the vegetables. You throw all of that away. There is no nutritional value left, no reason to eat any of that stuff when it's all said and done. You're getting rid of it. You're just going to.
Can you go back to you skipped? Oh yeah, the ideas for scraps.
Yeah.
Of the instructions. I guess maybe you're just reading.
Yeah, I just skipped away to look at the leeks there. Sorry.
Okay.
So yeah, you're going to use these maybe leek ends, maybe some tomatoes if you want a little tomato flavor. If you have some tomatoes, like maybe some wizened up cherry tomatoes in your refrigerator, you can throw those in. Some wilted greens even, not brown lettuce, but if you have wilted lettuce, you can throw that in, or any kind of wilted spinach that you won't eat in a salad. And then any kind of squash peels. And what you want to maybe think about avoiding, although some people say it doesn't bother them, is some of these other vegetables that can make your broth taste or your stock taste bitter. And they would be mostly your cruciferous vegetables. Those are vegetable broccoli, cauliflower, cabbages, anything in the cabbage family. But those, if you have ends and pieces, you can keep and use, cook down, make a cream of broccoli, cream of cauliflower soup. So even those don't have to go to waste. And then the other kind of vegetable classification that you might want to avoid is vegetables that are too starchy, because they'll make your broth or your stock cloudy. So that means potatoes or winter squash or corn. So if you don't really care about the cloudiness, no worries, but you will get a cloudier stock with that starch in there. Now, Marcia, did that cover for you what you were interested in?
Yeah, I'm just realizing we're just talking about the squash, and then we're going to use that for the basis of a vegetable soup maybe that uses some of those vegetables.
Right. Right. We're just talking about the when your recipe calls somewhere down the list for 3 cups of chicken stock, vegetable stock, whatever, this is that.
Okay.
So you're going to use this, and you're making this, and you're going to keep it. The strategy is to make a bunch of this and then keep some in the refrigerator. Then you have it on hand, but then also freeze some of it. And then you always have some stock or broth on hand. And it does keep in the glass jar in the refrigerator for about a week. Or you can freeze it in an airtight container. So
I freeze it all in Ziploc bags so that it compresses, and then I just label the outside of the bag. And then if I just need even just something to make a roux or something, I can just defrost a little bit of the chicken stock and use it that way.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And I know that for lesser quantities, some people also like to do it in ice cube trays, or any kind of silicone mold that you would want to fill and use for quantities that are smaller. It's a great idea. If you're organized enough and have enough freezer space, and you're not like me, when I go down to open up my freezer right now, I have to wear a hard hat. So that's the vegetable stock. Now let's take a look at some chicken stock here, because I love this, that we can take a rotisserie chicken or another kind of roast chicken. Don't ever throw a roast chicken bone carcass away. You can make this beautiful broth stock, and it'll look like this when it's finished in the pot. If you had it in the refrigerator, it gets really gelatinous. This is the collagen, and all those great minerals that we talked about. And then this is the fat that comes to the top when it's chilled. We can, oops, I'm so sorry. My finger went a little fast there. Let me go back to this. You can freeze stock in mason jars like this if you have a shelf that you're not in danger of knocking it off of, but you do need to freeze it with about this much head space. Otherwise your jar will crack, okay? And just use mason jars. You don't know about the quality of other jars that you might be reusing. So those are pretty reliable. But this is a sign of a good bone stock, that gelatin. You can make it with or without vegetables, herbs, or spices. So the other day, what I did was with a chicken that I had, I buy whole chickens a lot of the time, and I either make them whole or I disassemble them. So I cut them apart. I made chicken out on the grill with the thighs and the wings and the legs. I poached the breasts and made chicken salad with that. And then I threw the rest into the crock pot with the veggie scraps that I had in the freezer. And I let that stew with some herbs for several hours, and it made the best broth. So, or the best stock. You can, because it's pretty strong, dilute it with water in a soup. So sometimes you'll see recipes that call for 2 cups of stock and a cup or 2 of water. So you can do that. You don't have to. You can also put other liquids in there too. So looking at that recipe a little more closely, let's see if I can bring that up. It's quite similar. So this is the basic ingredients: bones from 1 or 2 chicken carcasses and water. That's it. You can start there. Sometimes I like just a plain chicken tasting broth. That's what I'm used to from the noodle soup that I grew up on. But you can also add these chopped vegetables, the same ones we talked about before. You can throw in a splash of white wine. Here's an ingredient. Well, these last 2 are interesting ingredients. Splash of apple cider vinegar. Now I see you nodding your head, Marcia. Why do we add vinegar? Anyone know? Not putting you on the spot, Marcia, but does anybody else know about that?
Last longer? I don't know.
That's a good guess. Yeah, that's a good guess. Actually, what happens with apple cider vinegar, or vinegar in general, is that it pulls the nutrients out of the bones.
Oh.
So by the end of the cooking time, there is no nutritional value left in those bones. And that's why we put vinegar in with any bones that when we're making a stock. And then if you're really brave, you can use chicken feet or heads.
Best.
Or certainly the next. Did you put your thumb up there, Marcia? Did you use chicken feet?
Well, I learned that from my grandfather. I mean, he had chickens, so I don't go and look for chicken feet, but I know the necks are really good if you have any parts like that.
Yep, very good. And I would not have any hesitation about using chicken feet if I could find them and they were already cleaned. I don't want to clean them, but they impart a really yellow cast and a very rich flavor to the broth. Yeah. Necks are good, gizzards are good, hearts are good, livers, no, because they will make your broth stock bitter. So you're going to put your bones in a large pot or a crock pot, cover them with the water, add anything else, and then in this case, we're going to simmer this for 8 to 24 hours. And why are we doing this? Why so long when the vegetable stuff only took a few hours?
Well, you're getting through the bones and trying to break down all the nutrients so that they get absorbed or come out of the bones.
That's exactly right. So during the last 10 minutes, you can add parsley if you want to for that front taste of parsley. And this says it stores up in the refrigerator for up to a week, or you can freeze it. Now, I just want to make a little footnote here. When you refrigerate this, as we saw here, a fat layer forms. And I have been able to keep my stock in the refrigerator for longer than a week if I don't disturb this. because this is a natural sealant and preservative on the top of the stock. So just an extra little thought there.
Sometimes I'll use that fat to brown up onions or
That's
whatever.
perfect. That's a great idea. Yeah, don't throw that away. That's a very
Got
good.
great taste.
Yes, yes. It's a little bit reminiscent of the lard can that grandma used to keep under the sink, or the
Right.
bacon drippings, a little bit like that. So let me stop and just see if there's anything else. Michael, is there anything in the chat I should know about?
No, the chat is pretty clear.
Okay. Anyone want to make any comments? We'll see. We'll see. We'll see. I'm sorry, I got Will's on my mind. We'll see. Any thoughts?
No, everything looks delicious. I can't wait to get started with, well, I don't know. I'm hoping that the bouquet or the other things will give it the flavor I'm looking for. Oh, I don't always have an opportunity to buy fresh vegetables. So like garlic and thyme and things like that. How do you feel about those, like garlic in a jar or garlic that you sprinkle? They're not the fresh ones. What do you suggest in that case?
Well, I do think that you can use some of those dried powdered kinds of things and use them in there as aromatics. It's a substitute. I always think the fresh is better, but you can use that. And just be aware that you are using 1/3 the amount of dried to fresh. So if you are using a tablespoon of fresh parsley, for instance, you want to use a teaspoon of dried. That's the conversion. So, and we're going to get to how to lay more flavor in here, because this is just the flavor for your bone broth. This isn't your soup yet.
Okay.
So here we are with bone broth. I'm going to go through this relatively rapidly because this is very similar, but I want to point out that when you're making bone broth, this is beef bone broth now. You're using a variety of different bones, including marrow bones, because we're getting the B vitamins and the other vitamins out of the blood marrow of the animal. And then we're also using joint bones. So consider the ankle bone. There's a lot of collagen, a lot of connective tissue that imparts all that gelatin, that glucosamine and collagen that we're looking for. And then these bigger shank kind of bones, and this is where the minerals are. So we're leaching the calcium and the magnesium and things out of these bones. So the bones all play a different role here. And what we're doing here with these, whoops, got ahead of myself here. A couple of extra steps with this one because of the nature of the beef bones. Well, you see it with chicken too. You might have to scrape off foam that comes to the top. You may see that. Just spoon that off. And with beef bones, what you can consider doing, get 10 pounds of them. You can cut this in half if you want, but while you're doing it, you might as well do it. And you blanch them first, and that's to get some of those impurities out of there. Some folks say you don't need to blanch. It's completely up to you. It does just remove some of that initially. And you can just do that by boiling them for about 15 to 20 minutes. And then you drain them and you rinse them. And then you put them in the oven with or without vegetables and roast them for about an hour, turning them about halfway through. And then put
oil on them, or does that matter?
No foil, no oil. Oh, did you say oil? No, just roast them as is. And then transfer them into the clean stock pots, and then scrape up any brown bits that you might have. Put a little water in the pan or a little wine in the pan and scrape those brown bits up and add them to the stock pot. Then add bay leaves, peppercorns, the apple cider vinegar again, and water. So right away, just even the addition of the vegetables, if you add them, and the bay leaves and the peppercorns we'll see, is going to flavor your broth much more so than what you would get from a canned broth, where they're just putting the bones in. They're really not flavoring it, except to add salt for the most part. Okay, so then you strain it and do what we talked about before. You can discard the bones at this point. They're not worth anything. You can take the meat off and use it for something else if you like, or put it into the soup that you're going to make. And it does freeze in the same way and keep in the refrigerator in the same way as the other stock that we looked at. So thoughts about that? Questions about that? So now you really do have a very flavorful start with your broth, but we want to go on to now, what else do we do to lay flavor in the foundation of a soup? So let's look at the soup making steps that we take. Nice little visual over here. The first thing we do is sweat the mirepoix and the aromatics. So here's our carrots and our onion and our celery, and we're sweating those in some oil. Now, I always like avocado oil. Avocado oil or olive oil would be fine. Avocado oil has a higher burn point, but you really are supposed to be kind of cooking these over a medium heat. You don't really want to burn them at all or brown them particularly, but the oil in these, the oil here is what releases some fat soluble compounds that bring flavor into your soup. So sometimes people say, well, can't I just sweat these in water? Well, you can, but it's not the same thing. It's not quite the same. So this is going to release a better flavor into your soup. And then
high burn point. Do you mean it doesn't smoke
right
at a higher temperature, or it smokes at a lower temperature?
No, I'm sorry. Very good point. It's really what the higher the temperature, the higher the smoke point, the higher you can heat it until it breaks down. So that's
because olive oil doesn't have a high burn point.
Right. Yeah. So it's actually, and I've been reading some things about that too, and they've been back and forth about that. So everything changes all the time too. So I need to stay in tune with that to see what they're going to say tomorrow about olive oil. So here's the other aromatics. So here's where you may be laying in your ginger. Maybe you want an Asian flavored soup, or you're laying in your garlic and your other aromatics. That could be some of your dried herbs. So this is your big step here, we'll see, to add flavor.
Okay.
So once you've got that going and it's smelling really good and it's all these things are getting soft and blended in, then you're going to add your vegetables. And you can add your beans or your legumes at this point too. And that's if they're cooked, generally speaking, unless you're into an all-day bean soup where you're cooking your beans from just being soaked. That takes a few hours. So, oh dear, there's my phone. Okay, so then adding, next would be adding your stock or your broth, and then your vegetable juices and any kind of additional flavors that you want, like wine or water. And then we're going to simmer and skim this.
Can I ask you, in step 3, does it go immediately to 4, or do you brown or do you heat them, the vegetables and legumes first, like you're doing the herbs and the spices, or do you just go vegetables and immediately add stock?
All I do is I put them in there and just stir them around for a little bit, mingle them a little bit, and then and you know, these are general soup making steps. So when you get into recipes, they might direct you one way or another with that, but you can just toss them around a little bit, a couple minutes on the stove, and then go ahead and add your stock and broth, because these things are really going to cook here in this. And then at the end is when you can add in your cooked meats, your cooked pasta, cooked grains, and then additional herbs, spices, and greens. So again, we'll see, here's where you add more flavor. So you create a foundation of flavor, first of all, in your stock. Then you lay another level of flavor in your early stage, and then you add more at the end. Is that giving you some ideas?
Yes, very much so.
Okay, fantastic. Then you can sometimes want to add a little bit of lemon or vinegar to a soup. I'm not always fond of that, but it depends on the soup, and you have to taste it and know what is good for your taste buds. And lots of times at the end, if you want to add any milk or cream, you can stir that in at the end. So we are just down to, we've got a few more minutes to go over these recipes. I'm just giving you some pretty basic recipes, vegetable soup and Italian minestrone. I'm showing you these because one is meat-based and uses the steps that we just talked about. The other is a vegetarian alternative that uses the steps. And that will be, I got a new mouse and you can tell, not very good with it
These
right.
be in the notes? Will the recipes be in the notes or should we?
They
copy?
will be. Yes, thank you. Yes, I will send you these. They will be an attachment, a PDF file. Sometimes I send links. Sometimes I send, this one will be just one document, I think. I think they're both. No, I guess I have them in two documents. So this is the vegetable soup. And it's calling for stew meat. You could easily use ground beef if you wanted to, but you're cooking that ahead of time. And then these are the vegetables, some onion, your carrots, your celery. You know what that is, right? There's your mirepoix. Here's your aromatic garlic. And then here is your homemade broth. And you're going to add other vegetables, tomatoes, and then basil, oregano, and thyme, and potatoes, and green beans, and corn, and peas, and parsley at the end. So let's look at how that goes together. Notice that you're going to kind of dry that beef off and saute it, but then remove it. Remove it from the pan, and then add oil to your pan and include the mirepoix in your pan and saute it for 3 minutes, and then add the garlic and saute it for a minute longer. The garlic doesn't have to cook as long to release. That's why you don't need to put it in with the celery, carrots, and so on. You don't want to overcook it or risk burning it because it's in tiny pieces. Then you add your broth, just like we saw in the instruction, your tomatoes, your browned beef, and then these other herbs and spices. Then add your potatoes, and you're just simmering this, adding the softer vegetables as you go along. Add your green beans, simmer a little longer. And then the corn and peas take the least amount of time. They basically just have to warm up. So you can put them in at the last and just let that heat through in about 5 minutes, and then stir in some parsley at the end. There we go again, another opportunity to add more flavor. So you're adding lots of good herbs along the way to bring out the flavors in your soup. So that's a pretty standard kind of vegetable soup, and I would just encourage you to have fun with it and explore other tastes in there. Throw in what you have. If you've got some vegetables in the refrigerator, let's face it, soup was kind of originally made to use up things we had on hand. So experiment. So if we're vegetarian, we need some other options for protein to make this a more complete meal. Your vegetable soup was a complete meal with everything that it had included in it. So here we're going to use some of similar ingredients. Here's our mirepoix and our aromatic garlic. And now we're going to use zucchini in this, green beans. Now we're introducing paprika in here and rosemary as a little change up in the herbs. Some tomatoes again, vegetable broth. You could use chicken broth. That would make it vegetarian though. Or chicken stock, we should call this if we're using our proper terminology. If you, do you ever buy Parmesan cheese in the chunk? Do you keep the end of it? Do you keep the rind? Don't throw anything away. Keep that rind in your refrigerator. It's hard as a rock. It looks like something that nobody would ever want to eat, and throw it into your next pot of soup. More flavor, we'll see.
Okay. Okay, great.
And then you can add a couple of cups of small pasta at the end too, and that's really your choice. So you'll recognize the steps. There's your mirepoix. There's your garlic being added, and then your vegetables, like we talked about, along with some herbs. And then adding your tomatoes and some more herbs. You know, some of these steps you maybe could combine even. I'm not sure exactly. It seems a little capricious how these were aligned, but it works. And then you can add kidney beans and then stir in more herbs. Take out that cheese rind and just adjust it, sprinkle it with a little Parmesan cheese, and you're good to go. So that's a delicious soup, and they do come together, well, in a relatively short period of time, but the longer you cook a soup, more flavorful it becomes, right? So what are you going to try first?
Probably the vegetarian.
The minestrone?
Probably. Mm-hmm.
Okay. You going to try to make the stock, the vegetarian broth?
Yeah, the vegetarian broth. Yes.
And then use that to make your minestrone.
Yes. Yes.
Love to know how it turns out. I'd love to
Okay.
know whether you make the flavorful soup that you hope you can make.
Okay. And then I'll have to start buying fresh parsley and fresh garlic. And I do use smoked paprika. I like that as a flavor.
I love that too. I love that too. So I have some other classes that are coming out. I teach these other classes on online resources and reading and recording stories for grandchildren. So that's completely different from cooking, but it's a lot of fun. These are not my next classes. I meant to update this, but I did not. But what's coming up this week that I want you to be aware of are a couple of new classes that I'm excited about. One is for Earth Day, because Earth Day is coming up, and I put together some fun information about Earth Day along with some activities and an Earth Day picnic menu, so that if you have you just want to get out in nature for the day, that would be a fun thing to do with you, by yourself, or with your spouse, or with your grandchildren, or whatever. But it's going to be a fun day. And I'm also starting, I have the class on bean soups and chowders going now, and another one on a Kentucky Derby party coming up. So check those out. And I would love to have you come. If you come to the Derby party, wear your hat if you have one. I have one to show. And you'll get all the notes after class with the recipes. And you know about giving feedback. That's super important for us. So please go in there and click on that feedback link and give us a little rating and a little feedback. And then also go check out the next class. And I know that one of the things we like to suggest is that when you book a class, that you think about how you can invite other people too. And that makes it nice for Get Set Up to grow and to expand to others and keep this a free service. But it's also really nice for you, because you can think of creative ways to get together with your friends. If you have a friend in another community or another state, maybe you can meet online and take a class together. So all you need to really do is click here, and you can share the class on Facebook. You can do something by phone or by email. You can copy the link and send it in a text. So we make it super easy for you to invite other people, and we would just love that. And that is about it for today. Spread the word. We have other community organizations that like to get involved and join their people up. So if you have a YMCA or something in your community that should know about us, let us know, or let them know.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so
See you
much.
next time.
See you next time. Take care.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. I enjoyed having you. I loved hearing your story about your perpetual soup pot.
Next time I'll show you that this is a soup bone that I repurposed that is a marrow bone. And
Oh my gosh.
I made it into I didn't want to interrupt you, but I'm the kind of person like you that I don't let anything go to waste. So after I ate the lamb that was on this and sucked out the middle, which they told me to do in the recipe, which was delicious, then I cooked it, then I bleached it, and then I made it into a necklace.
That is amazing. You go further than I would ever go. So you have my hat is off to you. Marcia, it's been a real pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
Take care.